tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Hi, Joe. Welcome to the Joy of Sunflowers. Thank you so much for joining me. Please introduce yourself a little bit more.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for having me. My name's Joe Scheller. I am a musician by trade. I work as a professional musician in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area of the United States, and I am also a music teacher by day. I currently teach kindergarten to fourth grade, and have for the past 4 years or so. But I've taught everywhere from pre-K through undergraduate. Um, in college. So my wife and I, we're a COVID couple. We got married in the middle of the pandemic in my mom's backyard, which is I wouldn't trade for the world, although it had its certain challenges that in the moment seemed somewhat unsurmountable, but yeah, ended up being exactly the way it should have always been. And we met playing music. So we met in a band. We tried really hard not to be the people that met in a band and then fell in love and got married, like very, very hard. And we ended up doing it anyway, which, is the best thing that's ever happened to me. So, yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here.
Beautiful. No, that's great. Yeah, I love how you said you wanted to be the couple that didn't do that. But
Yeah, we tried really hard. We had like a bunch of rules about not doing it, and then you know how it is. You meet the right person, and then none of
yeah,
those rules matter. Yeah,
yeah,
they're all fine.
I love the rule thing. Like it never
Yeah,
works. It never works.
yeah. No,
You
you're
can
like, no,
try.
I never date anybody I work with, and then you work with the most incredible person in the world. You're like, wow, that changed.
Yeah. Whoops. I've always found it really amazing how people have like clauses and things like when you go into workplaces and it's like, yeah, it's not going to hold anyone back. You can try, but
Yeah,
if someone finds the right person, it's done.
yeah.
No, that's great.
It's a nice illusion, anyway.
Yeah. So let's start from the beginning before we go into your sort of fertility journey. Um, did you always know you wanted kids, or was it something that happened when you met your wife?
Um, C, all of the above. Um, I, uh, I very much. Well, I'm going to back up a little more than that. I was raised in a household with my parents, and I have a younger sister, and my mom's parents, so my maternal grandparents, my nana and my pap, and they were like, they were just incredible. They were like, I just everything about them. They were like the ultimate grandparents, but also like just so maternal and paternal um, to us as grandkids. And growing, having them every day there made them sort of just like other parents. It was, and I always appreciated them and looked up to them. And so I think from an early age, sort of them as my role models or some of my role models, um, their sort of inherent beauty as parents and you know more specifically grandparents, but um, really imprinted on me, and that was just part of life, was that, and how important that was, and how much my grandfather taught me about just kind of leading by example, and being kind and getting to know people, and just so many of these little things that I picked up with, and I think I associated fatherhood with that sort of teaching. That sort of not teaching in the sense that I do it as a profession, but just that sort of like, this is how people learn, is we learn by watching what love looks like. Um, and so I think that growing up, I just thought that was, I never considered not having children. Um, I should say it that way. I always thought that was going to be something. And as I got older, what I saw around me, in friends and colleagues, made me sort of adjust my thinking on that. In that I wanted kids if the person I fell in love with also wanted kids and viewed parenting the same way I did. not parenting as in like the way we were gonna parent, but like that same sort of like observing love and what that familial love looks like aside of a romantic love. Um, you know, and I think yeah, when Amanda and I met, actually, she was not terribly keen necessarily on being sold on having kids. Um, and I was good with that because I was like, okay, this is this person that I've met. That's where she stands on it. And I don't, the last thing I want to do is parent alongside someone who doesn't hold it like in that regard. So I guess maybe a better way to say it was like, if I didn't find the right person, I didn't want to be a parent at all. I didn't want to be a father at all.
Oh wow.
And then I think both discovered sort of this like double helix parallel that we both felt that way. And so then it was like, it sort of clicked. It was like, oh, then maybe we should. If we're both waiting for the teammate, the partner who's going to, fulfill the other half of that obligation the way that we think it should be, and that journey the way it should be, then I guess we should. And that makes it sound really casual, doesn't it? I guess we should. Not nearly quite in quite that approach to it, but no, there was this sort of I can like remember the moment where we both went when she said it and I said it, and I was like, oh, okay, we want to be a mother, we want to be a father, we want to have a family of more than just us and the dogs that we watch. We board dogs for other folks sometimes. So yeah, that's how it came about. We arrived at that sort of by committee, but I think with the understanding that it always was about the other person.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the time how it actually like happens. Like if it's not like an accident, like, oh, surprise. Right. I think that we have those conversations, and it is very like, oh, we're having a meeting and we've made this decision, and it really is like that kind of thing. And it's funny because you said, oh, I know it's a bit weird, but it's not. It's like that is a lot of the time the sort of conversations that you have. If you're planning rather than something happening. So yeah, my husband and I, we had the same thing. We had a conversation about it, and yeah, it was just like, oh well, I want kids, great, okay, well, when, don't know yet, okay, well, we'll
Yeah, right, that's the other piece.
we come to it. So yeah, I think it's a normal thing. You're all good. So from there, where, like, you obviously decided that you wanted to have kids, so then from there, how do we move from there into actually trying and sort of realizing what was going on, and that you were gonna struggle with it?
Yeah, I think like a lot of folks, we got married, and then pretty soon after, my wife is a bit older than I am, and so immediately after getting married, pretty much we began trying, and we got married in October, and actually we got pregnant for the first time in the following March. Actually, it would be like, we found out on St. Patrick's Day, so the 17th, which we are coming up on here as you and I are speaking. We can talk about sort of the significance of that maybe later, but so we found out we were pregnant on the 17th, and we were pregnant for 3 days. And it was a Saturday morning that we first started seeing the signs of a miscarriage, a lost pregnancy. We went through a pretty horrible experience with the healthcare system. Horrible isn't a proper adjective for that. It was traumatizing, and it was deeply and darkly indicative of some things that needed addressed. um, the silver lining of it is it showed us those things that we needed to address and things that we never wanted to have to deal with again. So then in doing that, that led us to looking for a different doctor, which I think a lot is pretty common after you receive care that was that poor. And we, through that doctor and then some testing, we found out that part of our journey was a blocked fallopian tube on one side. And the immediate remediation for that was to have surgery to remove the tube. We again ran into a situation where we felt very failed by our healthcare network, or the support network around us, and we ended up opting not to have that surgery because wires were crossed and things seemed terribly impersonal. And so my wife just said, I don't think I want to do this. And so we went on yet another search for a doctor. But before that, we got pregnant for the second time, right after we had the decision not to do that. And this pregnancy lasted marginally longer, 5 days or so, until we saw the same symptoms and repeatedly went through another kind of terrible experience. And through both of those things, what I found, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but what I found was a remarkable lack of resources if you are a man, if you are a husband, or you are the partner, not to make it terribly gender specific, but if you are the partner going, not physically going through these changes, if you are the other partner in that relationship. And that was one of the things that led me, after this most recent miscarriage, which was about 6 months ago. It's in the fall. Our fall. I actually set out and have not made any of these ideas into physical actions yet, but began the idea of having a podcast with the intent of providing resources to both people going through this, and actually a podcast about grief was really what I went through at the same time that we were experiencing that. I had some students, some little people, some of my 5 to 10 year olds who were dealing with some pretty full-on emotional kind of things that happen sometimes in small lives. And it seemed like there was just a lot of people grieving around me in that moment. And I was among them, and not a tremendous amount of resources, not necessarily specific to the experience, but specific to how unifying grief can be, and how coping with it often involves a lot of the same things, no matter what the particular action is that has caused that. And as I said, when I introduce myself as a professional musician and someone who's teaching all the time, there's been a limited amount of time for me to sit down and do this. But one of the other advantages of being an educator is that I often have some free time during the day in the summer that gets filled up with all kinds of projects. But one of those is that I'd like to see come to fruition soon is that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just to cap off our journey to where we are today, we have now found a third doctor. My wife is currently in the process of being referred to an REI as well, and we're looking at it. We're currently going through our health insurance company to find out, try and get some specifics of what our coverage would be for an alternative therapy as well, which is called clear passage therapy, which she may have talked about when she was on. But it's a massage therapy. And so we are in the process of sort of moving forward with that as well. And that pretty much brings us to today, aside from one terrible experience I had outside of that, that was related to my own fertility and how the healthcare system handled that. So I've got lots to say when it comes to botched healthcare. But
Yeah,
we'll
if you're
delve
happy to
more-
go into that.
What's that?
If you're happy to go into your own experience, then do. But if you're not, then that's okay.
No, it's okay. Well, to start off, like kind of each brush with our health insurance or our healthcare, experience has been, it's been something. Our first was obviously when we had the first miscarriage, and the really disconcerting thing was it happened on a Saturday morning. Like we had just gotten up, and my wife said, "Oh, I have to go to the bathroom," and that's when she started to see the first symptoms. And so we weren't really sure, and I think, like so many people, because of course, once you start talking about this, people want to share their experience, as I'm sure you of all people have obviously realized. And so many men had the same experience, is that what's the first thing we do? We grab our phone and immediately Google, right? And the phrase that all of us read is like implementation bleeding. And, you hang on to that hope for like as long as you can. It's like, maybe it's just that, because you're trying to delay this reality. Because in our case, we had just found out like 72 hours prior that we were pregnant. We opted to tell our moms and like 2 close friends right away. That was it, because we sort of knew the ropes as far as timelines and things, and but never in my wildest dreams did I initially believe that those guidelines were there for good reason. It's not that I hadn't known people that had miscarriages. I've actually had lots of close friends, as many people do when you realize these kind of things, who have been through this before us. And I was grateful in that moment that we had only told those people. But you hang on to this hope, and then once you realize it, you start immediately, like, I went into like fight or flight, and immediately went into like fight. Like, I've got to make sure my wife is okay, right? Like cortisol, adrenaline spike. I can't function on anything except making sure my wife is okay, that she's healthy, and that we know what's going on. Because we're still like, maybe this is something else. We don't know. So we call her doctor. We get no response. So eventually we just call like the line that you would call for an emergency that's not 911. Like, we just called our healthcare provider and was like, hey, this is happening. What do we do? And basically they told us like, well, you can just sit around and then see what happens. Genuinely, there was zero urgency. They're like, well, we can try to have somebody call you back from that office. We didn't hear from anyone until like, Monday came, and I ended up taking a day from work, and we just went to the emergency room. Like, it's from Saturday morning until Monday, we couldn't get an answer from anyone. We couldn't get a call back, couldn't get anything. And they told us like, well, if you feel like it's an emergency, you can go to the emergency room. I was like, well, I don't know. She doesn't know. We've never been through this before. We don't. What constitutes an emergency? What we read on Google? Like, that's not great healthcare, And so we did that, and I would do it again if I could go back in time, knowing only the things I'd known then. I'd make that same decision. I may even make the same decision knowing what I know now, but we just made that decision because we're like, we have to make sure that she's okay. If we still have a viable pregnancy, we need to make sure that it's okay. None of that happened until we got to the emergency room. And even then, there was blood work after blood work after, there's that whole, we have to wait till the number actually turns down. And what if the number's not doubling, but it is still increasing? And, I remember for weeks afterward, like there was one point where they had to draw blood from both arms because one of Amanda's arms just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, my beautiful wife just like walking around with bruised arms from this because it was so repetitive they couldn't get the numbers to do what they wanted. And the whole time I stayed in, speaking from my perspective, I was 100% still in that mode of like, it wasn't until maybe, so from that Saturday to that Monday, that was all that mode. And then Tuesday, we talked and my wife said, I think you should go back to work. We can sit around here all we want. And, you can leave if you need to, but, we may need these days, you may need your personal time later, go to work, and I remember I went to work, I work in an elementary school, which I said, primary school. And we have, of course, all the doors are locked. We have like a swipe badge to open the outside door. Swiped my badge, I pulled the door open, and the first doorway, the first classroom right there is a kindergarten classroom. And there was just like a 6-year-old who was having a bad day and was just like, that cry that kids do when they're truly, truly distraught. And the sound of that when I opened the door, just like it cut through all the fight or flight. It cut through every bit of that and just made me sort of full on face all the emotions I'd been damming up. And I felt the first real surge of like true grief and sorrow that I had been like shelving. I mean, I had cried, we had spent time together, but the whole time we were crying together, I was thinking about her. And I hurried up and like just sort of a gut reaction. I think I hurried up and like bottled it up again, like squeezed it back up, went on with my day because I was like, I gotta get through my day. And it was the spring of 2021. No? Yeah, 2021. Sorry, it was March 2021. My district, we were still wearing masks, mandatory. And because of that, I was not allowed to be in my classroom. I was teaching music on a cart. We had to go around to the kids so that they didn't like occupy the hallway with all the other kids. It was one of those COVID things that we probably thought was helping. And whether it was or it wasn't, that was the procedure we went through. I think it probably did. I don't know. I don't have any data to back that up, but I'm going to say it did. It made my life interesting. I was like a little music vagabond. I had my guitar on my back and my cart. And I like remember the classroom. And in fact, every time I walk in that classroom, I have this memory. The teacher had I was teaching in other people's rooms. So I was like sort of at her teaching station. And I had my guitar and someone just innocently, one of the kids said something about like, oh, Mr. Scheller, well, your son or your daughter or your kid, they made a reference to, not, of course, having no idea, just assuming that because they're 6, assuming I'm their teacher, they assume I have kids, right? Because, their teacher has kids. So obviously all of the teachers have kids, right? It just crushed me. I had to half step out of the room, and I'm in a mask. I'm like, I feel like I can't breathe. The whole bit came crashing down, like the wave crested completely and dumped me. And I didn't really have any answers. I'm pushing my cart in between classes, going as slow as I can to quickly Google on my phone, like miscarriage advice men, or like men's help for, ended pregnancy, and coming up with like maybe one article. I think there was like a Men's Health magazine article that was pretty much like, yeah, give yourself time to grieve and after you do that, you can get back to being a supportive partner. And it was like, yeah, there's truth in that. Like, you're not any good to anybody else until you're good yourself. But I think what was different the second time we had our second miscarriage, I let myself grieve immediately. And what was better was we did it together. And there were some differences too, in fairness, we'd been through, you hate to say the process, but we went through this experience once together. We sort of knew what we were dealing with, even though it was, the symptoms were a little bit different. I get the sense that they're never all the same. But that difference and doing that truly and together immediately was so different and so much more healthy.
Yeah.
And I had a friend of mine who him and his wife had been through a miscarriage. 2 of them actually. And when I told him what had happened, it came up, and I said, oh yeah, we've been through that too. And he said, oh, it's so hard on a marriage. It's just so hard. And my reaction to that was like, nope. We had the complete opposite experience. Like, I don't, our love deepened our relationship as two humans. Like, it deepened so much through that. And, there's a lot of analogies and kitschy little things, like, you go through the fire and you forge the metal, or whatever, there's, adversity strengthens the, whatever. And I'm not I'm not belittling any of that or
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, but feeling it happen for real, like, just being like, I've never loved my wife more than right now, and we're both so sad and crying so hard. It was something. And so that second time we went through it, and I realized how much healthier I handled it that second time. That's when I was like, yeah, there really needs to be more resources for men. And every guy you talk to, and I hope maybe some other people say the same thing to you when you talk to them, is every single guy, like, the number one thing that someone said to me is like, yeah, I wish there was more resources. I wish there was, first of all, I wish guys talked about it more than just like, oh, sorry to hear that, smack on the back, like, or like, I wish there was more resources out there, like, right alongside the care for women. But obviously, by our experience, the care for women leaves a lot to be desired too at times. Because our second, and I don't think I actually mentioned this, the second time we had a miscarriage, we didn't have much better healthcare. Even though we had made changes, we'd got to know a new doctor, we felt really good there. When push came to shove, when the rubber met the road, it ended up being roughly the same experience, And to be honest, I had a experience too where they had sent me for a fertility test. Her doctor said, you need to go to a urologist. We should do a fertility test for you as well. And they did it, and it was so messed up. They're like, oh yeah, you can just go to the lab at any time. I show up to the lab. That lab doesn't actually do it. They send me to a different lab. That lab said they were supposed to be open. They're closed. I go back again when they're open. They don't do it either. So they finally sent me to a hospital that does do it. I get in, I check in, I get through both check-in people. They check all my stuff, and I get to the point where I actually see the nurse. She hands me, like, the collection vessel. I've come back. I hand it to her to submit it. And she's like, hey, did you have an appointment? I was like, no, they told me I could just walk in. Like, the script's in there, like the order for it's in there. She's like, yeah, we can't use this, so sorry. And I can't, no one who works in healthcare believes me on this part, but I swear this happened. She picked it up and just put it in, like, the little hazmat trash can. She was like, boop. And I was like, it was like staring. I was like in disbelief. I was like, what do I do then? I don't know what to do now. And she was just like, oh, we have to make an appointment here. Here's like one you can take home, and this. So I do all of that. I do, I take care of, like, collection at home. I get it to the lab by the time that they state. I get they get it submitted in enough time and all this. I go and see my doctor, the urologist, and he's like, wait, where did you say you had this done? I'm like, at the hospital. Like, it's literally like a mile down the street. And he's like, yeah, they just don't really do a good job there. I'm going to send you somewhere else.
Oh my gosh.
And that, I mean, like, it was because there was like a number in there that was outside of a normal range. So immediately I was like, oh, maybe this is something we need to look at, we need to address. He's like, nah, that usually happens when they don't process it like quickly after collection and blah, 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 like this whole 9 yards. And he's like, no, you have to go do it again. He's like, so, I mean, it's when I say that, and I get the feeling that perhaps we've had an uncharacteristically poor one, but also at the same time, if all of that can happen to us, some of that's probably going to happen to everyone along this journey. And sort of the cold hand, the stoic, like cold hand of medicine is really sort of offensive when you are deeply sad. There's like one person who we saw in the hospital who was like, I'm so sorry.
One.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think like truly, and the rest of them were kind of like, like it was really dispassionate. I think.
Yeah, honestly, similar stories the whole way. We've had a few that were positive, and I was just like, wow, really? That's amazing.
I have cousins who are like, we named our baby after the doctor, and I'm like, that's amazing. Who are they? Where did we find you?
Yeah, where are they? Are they hiding under a rock?
Yeah, right.
I've never met one, and it really is like that. And you're right. Like the resources aren't there, the support's not there. I know a lot of women, and I'm one of them too. We wonder like what the experience is like for you going through it, because obviously we're going through it like physically, emotionally, we know where the baby is, all of those things, but you guys, you are from the outside, you're not actually attached. So it must be like we always say, oh, it must be really weird to kind of like watch that, but it's still your baby and it's still there, and it's so you're going through all of that, but you're on the outside. So what is that experience like, if you can explain it?
In both instances, both of our particular instances, it was the way my wife said, I don't think something's right, or reached for her phone to text her mom, that or the second time that she just cried from the bathroom. And the first time was a panic. Like I was panicking, trying to figure out and hoping where my brain went first was incorrect, right? Like hoping I'm just like a dumb man, and that my first, like there was some other thing that might have been happening that I was missing, right? I like just assuming that I was ignorant to something, and praying that my brain wasn't already to what was probably the likely scenario. And the first time I never really got out of that. Like I was just spinning, and that led straight into like, I have to make sure she's okay. Like, and everyone says, I'm sure everyone says, has a different way of saying this, but like my wife is my favorite thing about my life. Like my favorite thing about my life is the relationship I have with my wife. More than playing the saxophone, which was like the first thing I loved in life, more than writing music, more than teaching. That when we met, my whole life changed. And so my first reaction, as I said before, was like immediately like, I have to make sure she's okay. I want to make sure, firstly, that. Secondly, I need to make sure that this very young baby, this very young in the pregnancy, this we only got to like what do they do, the sesame seed? Is that one of the, we only got to In fact, we referred to that soul as Sesame. But we got that far. And so, realistically, I think that's like 6 or 8 weeks. But at that point, 72 hours in, your brain does this flip. In fact, I'm going to say this like all Australians know each other, so excuse this gross generalization. But there's a great podcast for guys who become fathers called Dad Pod. And it's hosted by Charlie Clausen and Asha Ginsburg. And I, like, the minute I found out I was pregnant, I listened to one of Charlie's other podcasts with Will Anderson and knew of this other podcast. So like the minute we found out we were pregnant, I started listening to that podcast. And my brain clicked into like, it was like instant. And maybe some other people talk about this, but for me, the minute we saw we saw the cross on the pregnancy stick, I was like, oh my God, I'm a dad. It happened instantly. There was no ramp up. There was no like whatever. It was just like, boom, oh my God, I'm a dad. Holy cow. And not in a panicky way, like in this real joyous, like raw, visceral way. And then 3 days later, to have the absolute whiplash of that was like, it should have been crushing. I didn't let it be crushing until later, which I talked about. The second time, as soon as my wife started crying in the bathroom, I knew. And that was hard because when we found out we were pregnant the second time, the first thing my wife said to me was like, she started crying. She's like, I just don't want to lose this one. That was like her second thought. And when she started crying in the bathroom, my heart just broke, shattered. Like it felt like every other heartbreak I've ever known times a million. Just like for her, for us, for what we hoped. Because the grief, and I said this to some people once I found a way to articulate it, and I'm sure you and people you have had on have a much better way to articulate this. But the hard thing about this grief is there's no point in comparing types of grief, but when you lose someone, anyone who's lived a life, any amount of it, one of the things you hear when that person passes, if they're an old person, they live to be like, they have a full life. Ah, man, good innings, right? Good innings. They got good long life. Look at all the people who love them. Look at all the people they loved. Look at this beautiful thing they'll find. If it's a young person, we say, oh, how tragic. There was so much life left to live. I can't imagine how, the people who knew them felt. Even if it's someone who's just suddenly lost their life, there tends to be an upside that people associate with it that's meant to help, right? That's meant to remark on what a beautiful thing their life was. When a pregnancy ends, you're grieving for yourself, and there's no one that lived it to kind of enjoy the hopes and the successes of or anything, or the tragic of what would have been. You're only grieving your dreams, and that is really tough, because when you lose your dreams, like we hear that so many times, right? You have to hold on to your dreams. And so when you're faced with like one of those dreams being ripped away from you, the what could have been, it's a different kind of grief, and one that I had never been confronted with. Certainly not one that I had to try and navigate along with somebody else. And like I said before, the inside of my wedding ring literally says teamwork. um, and we hold that as one of the closest pillars and tenets of our marriage. But I've never been so grateful to have someone who viewed it that way as in those moments, because I don't know that you can face that kind of grief. Well, I'm sure there are people who do. I know there are people who do. But I can't imagine doing it on
Yeah, no, it's you're so right. It's I've been quite amazed at how taboo pregnancy loss is. Like, you know, and the things you get told are so much different than the things you get told when someone who lived a life, you know, or lived part of a life are told when someone passes away. It's really shocking. And kind of disturbing in many ways, because you're like, you know, you'd expect a bit more, you know.
Yeah, a bit more. That was the one thing I was surprised by. Yeah, you're right. And that's a good way to say it. You expect more. Like people be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear." It was like, yeah, that doesn't quite cover the breadth of what I feel, you know?
Yeah, it's like it's diminished. It's diminished.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think part of that too is because we all jump at the hope of a baby, right? Like there's people want to shoot off the confetti cannon the minute somebody pees on a stick. And I don't mean to be, try to be a bit light about it, but um, I just actually remembered I saw a notification pop up, and I'm from this person, and I'm going to tell the story. It's not my story to tell, but I'll leave her name out of it. I have a dear friend of mine, the first person actually I ever heard of who had a miscarriage, like the first person I ever knew of that had lost a pregnancy. And she recently told me that when she lost that pregnancy, she was at work. She went to the bathroom and immediately knew she had to leave. And she was signing out of work, like she's a teacher as well. She was signing out of work. And someone said, "Oh, you're going home early." And she said, "Oh, yeah, I don't feel well. Just trying to get out of there." And they said, "Ooh, maybe you're pregnant." And she was like, I fell to the ground. She's like, I had to be helped out of the building and then get to my car and drive myself to the doctor, like where my husband met me. People don't realize. My wife and I had a similar situation. We were at a family gathering, and someone said something like, "Oh, are you pregnant?" It was like right after our first miscarriage, and the whole table like erupted in cheers, right? And it's a joyous thing. A baby is a joyous thing, and I don't think anyone should run away from that. But what I think people need to realize, and I think my point in saying this, and maybe I haven't articulated this as well as I should have, but that joy is like unbridled, right? We save the joy of a new life for like a sacred place among our rankings of joy, right? But the grief then, when you expect that, or you've come to expect that, and then it doesn't happen, is equally as high, sort of on the other end of the spectrum. And so you're right when people say like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." It's like it doesn't feel like enough. What's really amazing to me is when you talk to someone who has had a pregnancy loss and they find out that you have, there's a depth of understanding there. At least in our generation. I feel like prior generations, they all sort of like, they were remarkably British about it. They were like, we're not going to talk about it. We're going to feel deeply, but we're not going to talk about it. And we're just going to stand there and like stiff upper lip it.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you think about it in terms of like we know that our resources are lacking right now, okay?
Wow,
And
right.
resources we have are actually a lot more extensive, believe it or not, than any of the resources that anyone from those generations had. So for them, there was nothing, like absolutely nothing, no groups, no like trying to talk to anyone about it. It was so taboo, it wasn't even mentioned. And then when it came to doctors, they were just like, "Oh, it happens."
Well, and that's the thing, it's not happening any more than it did. Like statistically, the numbers haven't changed. It's not like
Yeah, I mean, apparently the statistics have changed recently, like the numbers have gone up, the percentages have really skyrocketed in the last few years for infertility and pregnancy loss.
Sure. I mean,
But
I'm speaking like kind of
in
like
the last sort of, yeah, in a
Yeah.
broader sense, in the last sort of 20 odd years, yeah, I mean it was pretty much the same, and it's only really happened, I think, as far as I know, in the last few years. And yeah, it's just, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
I think we do people a big disservice too. I don't know about what sex ed is like in, or health class is like, obviously in like there. I can only speak to like American public schools, but it's like always taught by a gym teacher, and I'm not our phys ed teachers. I'm not disparaging anybody, but at least when I was in school, and I think it's probably better now, but when I was in school, our health classes were raucously poor. Like it was like, and then I grew up in a Catholic family as well. And so the shame around like sex, stunning. But with that shame comes ignorance of like some really healthy knowledge. I always say it's like being Catholic's like being told to, at least in my, and I don't mean this poorly, it's just sort of a fact that shame goes along with some ignorance. It's like, go mow the lawn. You have a lawnmower, but you don't know how to use it, and you don't know what any of the rules are. It's like, well, you're probably not going to get it on, and if you do, you might chop off a leg. Like, it's really, if you don't educate people about it, and I don't say this specifically of religion or Catholicism or whatever, but people need to be educated in a larger sense with sex for obvious reasons, and some not so obvious reasons if you look at the statistics. But then to a larger degree, tell people that this is an potential outcome of a pregnancy, and tell them the numbers. We're so terrified that young people are going to have more sex if they think that there's a chance they're not going to get pregnant, right? Like there's this fear, and I've heard this said several times. It's like, oh, well, you can't tell kids what that is, because then they won't run away from sex. Like no one's gonna anyway. First of all, like no one's in control of those hormones. A, and if they are, that's just situational. But then B, that's what. So you're gonna scare people away from it instead of teaching them about it. And so what this does then, I think, by and large, at least from the experiences I've had and the conversations I've had, is people grow up just thinking they got it all. They got all the numbers. Yeah, miscarriages happen. How often do they happen? Ask someone who's never been down this road how often it happens. Or someone they're going to tell you, they might say like 1 in 10 and think they're shooting on the safe side of a percentage. That's like not even, I mean, it's I think part of the reason that it grips people so viscerally, and that grief comes so out of nowhere. Like I said the first time, is like I was aware that happened. I had close friends who had gone through this, multiple close friends. I was aware-ish of how it was a possibility. The actual facts of how likely it is was not something I was aware of. And by and large, I would say that speaking purely for heterosexual couples, generally, I don't think men are. I think women may have a better education about it. Maybe that changes.
No, we're the same. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's
Well,
just the general. Yeah, it's just the general, like, you put this in there, you do the thing, you have a baby, and it's terrible, and you should not do it. That was pretty much it. And obviously, you could get all these diseases, and that was pretty much it. You didn't really go into miscarriage and losses and on all those sorts of things. Like it wasn't covered. And I do think I find it really weird that some people have said, oh, but then they'll want to do it more. Because to me, when you find out that, I mean, some women actually get put off, actually do, because they're like, well, so my body's going to go through all this crap, and then I'm not even going to get a baby out of it, So there is, I don't know, I think knowledge is important. You know, we live in a world where, I mean, if you are religious, like, you know, if you are Catholic, we live in a fallen world. So, you know, we have the knowledge already. We already ate from the tree. You know, I'm a Christian, and as far as I'm concerned, we have knowledge, and we may as well take note of it, because otherwise we're just going to be in a world of trouble, because we don't know anything, and we're going to get caught up in the whirlwinds. And that's what a lot of us who have gone through loss, a pregnancy loss, do have happen, because we just don't know. We're not told. We don't look into it, and yeah, we just get taken along the ride. And I like the way you showed that scale, and it's so true. Like that joy, but then it's not evenly matched. And it, you know, people are so quick to like, oh yeah, you're having a baby, I want to get involved, this is amazing, what do you need? But when it comes to loss, it's like, oh, that's too bad. People have that happen, see you later. You know.
Yeah, and that's and I've never. So I said this. I had this conversation with someone. I was always like, "What do you want people to be less excited about a baby?" It's like, no, I don't. What kind of person wants people to be less excited about a new life? Like it is like the true miracle, right? Like it's the
Yeah.
true wonder of all life is that, you know, like the birds and beasts, like two people love each other very much, and then there's a baby, right? You hear it from the time you're young, and then at some point you realize, like, holy, I don't know, I probably shouldn't swear, but like, holy crap! It's like, so with nothing, just literally two bodies, you can make an entire other life. Like it is, it's the most remarkable thing in the world. It's the reason that, like, you know, songs are sung about like love, heartbreak, and life, right? Like that's it, you know. And of course, that's maybe my biased perspective on the world, but like, you know, we write about these things, and life is this great miracle. No one is asking for anyone to be less excited for it. But when you're expecting that, um, and then it gets taken away from you, I mean, it's almost, in some ways, this isn't even really fair, because you go from this joy, and this much grief would only take you back to like a baseline, right? This would take you back to like your baseline emotional state. But it's that grief, that joy is no longer there. And then it's like additional grief. So in a way, the grief is higher, because it's not just the loss of the pregnancy. It's the loss, like I said before, it's the loss of what could have been. It's the loss of all of your hopes and dreams.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as well, like when it comes to your hopes and dreams, like people underestimate sometimes what those are, especially with you know, an unborn child. You know, I mean, for anyone who's ever experienced a big massive shift in their lives, where they've gone from doing something that they love doing, and then they've had to change to something that maybe they don't like at all, that there was a loss of a dream, and they're like miserable, they go through this really terrible time, you know. And then if we take that kind of a loss, like a journey, and then we add into that pregnancy loss, actually losing a life, you know, then we kind of get a feel a little bit more of what it's like. But it's, yeah, a lot of people, I think, forget that whole dream, that vision, because
I think people sometimes. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you.
no, that's all right. It's just, yeah, I was just saying, because, you know, obviously it's hard, and they don't want to really think about it because it's sad.
That's it. So people run away from it because it's sad, and you know, we don't like sad. Um, but then the other thing is, I think you said people underestimate it. I think people underestimate how quickly you build those hopes and dreams too.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like when my brain flipped into like dad mode. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah.
I was like, immediately it was like, okay, I got to know what kind of stroller or what kind of pram I have to get, right? That was a big, we were talking earlier about like the different words, like Charlie and Asha kept going on about prams, and I was like, what is a pram? I don't know what a pram is. That and nappies. I was like, I don't know what those are. These dad things I need to find out about. It's like quick search and was like, oh, it's a stroller and diapers. I got it. I'm good. I understand. So, but like, I was like listening to that. I was like figuring that out. Figuring out. It's like, okay, so you have to like have like a heavy duty one. Then you have like a travel one that's like light. And you can pick out. It's like, okay, I gotta get on that. It's like, all right. It's like, oh, should we use reusables or like this, blah, 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 right? I'm down to like, God, I can't wait to like. I wonder what they're like. I wonder what they're gonna like. I wonder what like instant. I'm talking. It was 3 days. It was 72 hours. I used to drive an hour and a half to 2.5 hours round trip to work. Because we used to live south of the city, and we taught out here before we moved. And that whole drive for those 3 days, man, I'm telling you, Ella, I'm telling you, for those 3 days, all I thought about was that. It occupied my every waking thought. I didn't think about a single, and you know what? I could have watched, you couldn't have brought me down. There was zero news that could have brought me down those 3 days. I was like living, just absolutely living in like oxytocin, serotonin land. I was just, right? And that was 3 days. It wasn't like we made it through the, which, realistically what? That means we were like 6 or 7 weeks pregnant by the time you find out,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
in that window. So like, we weren't to a first trimester. We weren't, we didn't have any idea what we were having. Not that we wanted to find out anyway. It wasn't like there was this life was an amorphous thing. It was what could be.
Yeah.
There was nothing. I didn't know anything about it, and the bewilderment of it was amazing. To live in that was incredible, and to have that, I mean, doused like completely. There wasn't. It's like if someone it's like if somebody put out a fire and there wasn't even smoke, right? It just choked out immediately. People don't. I think you're right. I think people don't give it enough. And part of it is because we all experience the loss of a loved one as adults. By the time you get to a certain age, even as kids, you experience the loss of someone. Not everyone. Part of it is not everyone has been through this experience, and so sort of not by any fault of their own, they don't have a barometer for it. They know what it's like to lose a grandparent. Some of them may know what it's like to lose a parent or a sibling or a cousin or a family pet. They've gone through some loss where they understand that, and there's sympathy and empathy there because they live in that. There's compassion. You're right. People run away from things that are sad. And this is something that's sad that they don't really maybe have any experience with. And I think that was, I mentioned before too, and I think bears repeating, it's always obvious when someone is talking to you and they've been through it.
Yeah.
You can tell by the way their body changes when they find out that you've also been through it. There's just this deep, there's this deep let go of like, oh, because like there's a genuine sadness that you've also been through that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think that I was really angry the first time. I wanted people to know how terrible it was, not because I wanted them to feel bad for me, but because like I felt like society didn't understand. It's like, no, we should do, and we should. There are systematic changes we can do, right? And we're, easy things like just educate people, tell them about it, show them, ask them to imagine what that's like. I think part of it too is in a Western culture, we run away from sadness. We run away from discomfort. I was recently listening to sort of, not directly in preparation for talking to you, but a little bit. I recently listened to a short article by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. They kind of co-wrote this thing about the secret to happiness. And one of the things they said is that people run away from things that aren't joyful. But one of the differences in sort of Eastern philosophy, or a lot of Eastern philosophies, is that they just take that as part of life. Sadness is just part of life. It's the great contrast that gives joy. Right? That's what makes it so amazing, is the bottom of this. And so if you just constantly run away from that, and you run away from even just empathizing or sympathizing with someone who's gone through this, and really thinking what it would be like to go through that. No one wants to think about it, because most people, and the other half of the people don't think it happens that often, so why would they? But if you could educate people that, and they could just live in that moment and imagine it. I don't want in a perfect world, I wish no one went through it, right? We all wish that. We wish we could spare everyone those, especially those first couple hours.
Yeah.
The ones that are raw and visceral and like just claw at your insides till there's you're just kind of empty and hollow. But those ones, I wish we could take that away from everyone, but
Yeah.
you can. It's maybe someday we will. Maybe we'll figure it out. I don't know. But until then, we shouldn't run away from the sadness of it. And I don't want anyone to like sit there and weep with people either. But you're right. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and then moving on with your day doesn't really seem enough. I've never kind of thought of it in that phrase. Just like it just doesn't seem enough.
Yeah.
Right.
I like what you were saying though, and I'm actually I'll disagree with you in just one little bit there, which was, I do think people should weep with others. I think that actually is, and even like a stranger, because then they're feeling that and they're allowing themselves to feel that, and I think it is really, it's really important that we do that, because without that, I think there is really a lack. And I mean, I'm coming from sort of a biblical standing here, because I always say to my husband, because he didn't really feel the loss of our two miscarriages, and I said to him, look, Jesus set the example. He cried. Like when someone died, he wept, and it wasn't his child, but it was his child in a sense, because his, Jesus. But I was like, he cried, right? So
I was like, Jesus.
Jesus.
Like Father, the Trinity.
Yeah, he's not his father, but he sort of is, but Jesus.
There's a spirit too. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. But he wept, and I think that was the point, And I said to him, he shows us the example, and I said, like when someone dies, it is sad, and it does get you, because you think about that person who's living. You don't think about the person who's died, because hopefully they've gone to heaven and they're happy, but
right.
but everyone left behind still has to deal with that, and that is sad, and that is hard, and that's, we can weep, we can be sad for those people.
Well, and part of it is, I'm convinced that the more we grow up, the more we unlearn. Kids understand some of this so deeply. It's funny. So my wife and I were talking about this today. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of our first pregnancy loss. And you had just talked to her recently, and I knew I was doing this with you today. My lesson plans also lined up today that in kindergarten this week, or in first grade, excuse me, this week, we're singing You Are My Sunshine. And it's not, You Are My Sunshine is a song that we all learned probably in the context of someone older, a parent or someone paternal, singing it to us or teaching us to sing it, right? But there's a second part of that song that not everybody, I think, learns, and it's the other night, dear, as I was sleeping, I dreamt I held you in my arms. But when I awoke, dear, I was mistaken, so I hung my head and cried. That's the second verse of it. And I always explain to the kids, because they think it sounds sad. And it can be. In the lens, from the perspective that you or I are speaking right now, it's horribly sad, because I went through that. I woke up, I had dreams of kids, and at one point, those dreams were on a path to being a reality, and then they weren't. But I tell my kids all the time, it's like, love is, and they understand this so much better than we do. They understand, because the boys will giggle sometimes about it, but then if you really talk to them about it, especially away from their friends, they love each other often. Particularly the boys, as they get to be like 7, 8, 9, those friendships, because they're not interested in girls yet in any sexual context, so they're just completely those platonic friendships. That platonic love is so strong. That's like the strongest relationship they have. That's why kids get so upset about their friends, and we go like, well, they're not your, that's why that love is the most real love they know, outside of the love they mostly receive. They feel love toward their parents too, but at that age, that love hasn't yet changed sort of into that very familial thing. It's familial love, and they love them more than everyone else, but it's a different love, I think. But I used to explain to them, like, someone doesn't have to be gone for you to miss them. Missing someone is just love. That could be the person in the next room. Maybe you just want to be closer to them. I always ask them to remember when they were in preschool, and they want, when they were 4 and they miss their mom, and they want to go home and see their mom. Right? You're crying and you're sad because you love that person and you want to be with them. Right? And it was hard singing that song this week with them, because I'm telling them that, and I'm working with them about that, and how love isn't like, ooh, and how I tell it to them, like, it's not, I can't say it's not romantic love, it's platonic love, because they're 6, right? I'm like, it's not kissy love. It's not kissy love. It's like, I love you, good night, love. But as I was singing it, I was thinking, it's like, yeah, one of the hardest things about grieving pregnancy loss is, if you sing that song, it's not somebody you miss who's not there but still with us. It's not someone who is never even here. And yet, man, every time I sing, because I have them sing the part they know, the "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," as I'm choking up and trying to sing over a Zoom call. I have them sing that, and then I sing the middle part. I have them sing the last part again to show them how it's and it grabs you, like it. I'm sure we have not had any children yet, and I know that when we do, there'll be some comfort, but I can't ever imagine. You'll never view it the same way.
No one views it the same way after they've lost a child.
Yeah, you carry it with you, and so becomes sort of this lens of perspective that, like, I find myself living in a lot, and not in a not always in a sad way, but oftentimes when I think about grief, it's through that lens, or I feel that it's through that lens.
I think I mean, one of the things I say to the women I speak to is, you're still a mother, even though you've lost. And the same goes for the father. You are still a father. You may have lost, but that child is still yours. So whether that child is in heaven or wherever you picture it, you're still a father to that child. And, whatever that looks like for you, you have to sort of live with that. But you are still a father. And I think that can sometimes be really healing and helpful for us women. I don't know if it's healing and helpful for you. But I think a lot of us, we feel this, like, there's no valid thing there. It's like, oh, well, there's no baby, so I'm not a mum anymore. But I think when you start looking at it as in, no, it doesn't change anything. You're still a mother, you're still a father. It's just that your child isn't here on earth with you. And I think that's how we see it when a child dies to a parent, when, like, we don't go to them, oh, well, you're not a mum anymore, or, oh, well, you're not a dad anymore. They're still a mother and a father. Their child is just not here on earth. Yeah. So you're still a father. It's just your child's not here, which sucks. Before we wrap up, we didn't actually talk about what your results were, because we got to the doctor and then he's like, I want you to retake that test. And then if we didn't go into that, and then we sort of ended up going into all this philosophical and awesome stuff. By the way, you should actually do a podcast and it should be, I think, like grief and like trauma and stuff, like surrounding grief, because it would be amazing, like you know, just talking to you, like you have like looked into these different areas, and yeah, I think it is needed, it's necessary, it's needed. So if you want to do it.
I appreciate the vote of confidence. I have a great name, which I will say here, but no one's allowed to take it. I'll put some pressure on myself. If I don't do this within the next year, somebody can take this. So there you go. I'll put the pressure on myself. But I always wanted to call it Making Lemonade. What to do when life gives you lemons.
Oh, nice.
Because, you know, that phrase of like, oh, what do you do when life gives you lemons? Oh, you make lemonade. It's like, yeah, most people see that as a positive. Like, oh, when an opportunity comes your way, it's like, yeah, but what if the lemons aren't that good? Yeah, what if they're not great? It's like, how do you make life out of that? You know. But anyway, so the results. The thing is that as a teacher in America, we don't get much for PTO. We have all this time that we get in the summer between semesters. But during the year, it's kind of hard. And knowing with the pandemic just happening and me coming back, I taught for a bunch of years in my early 20s, left teaching to go to grad school, and then I freelanced as a musician for a number of years, and only came back to teaching in 2019 in public schools. And so then in 2020, the pandemic hit. And your first year back, you just get sick constantly with little kids. So I've really not accrued much sick time over these years. It's been hard to find. The other thing is, around here, it's hard to get in with specialists. I don't know. Obviously, the healthcare in our country looks totally different, but it's hard to get into specialists. So even for me to go get that testing done, it's like sometimes the windows I was like, I can't get there then. So it's been a bit of a cat and mouse game of trying to figure out when to get there. So the short answer is we don't know yet. We don't know yet. It looks like there was only like one number that he had any concern about, and that was the one that he really thought had more to do with anything else. But you know, even in that instance, we were talking about education earlier, and I know we're going a bit long. We're getting a little long in the tooth here, and I don't want to drag this on forever because as I said, I realize how not concise I am. But we're talking about education. I went to that appointment, and in like 20 minutes, he educated me tenfold more than anyone ever had. He's like, yeah, a healthy couple gets pregnant once every 12 months. He's like, that's what the statistic, at least in America, is like, you know, on average, a healthy couple get pregnant once every 12 months. If your wife has a blocked tube on one side, you're looking at once every 2 years, you're looking at once every 24 months. He's like, so the fact that you guys have gotten pregnant as you have, as often as you have, is actually good. You're on the upper side of that percentile. And then some other things, and you know, he was explaining to me what the numbers in the chart meant, which you know, there's some amount of that you never know that stuff until you have a reason to know it. Sort of, you know, when it comes to medical stuff, it's like, oh, what are my numbers? What does this word mean? What is, you know? So the one that he was concerned about had, in his words, minimal impact on my overall fertility, but one that he still thought that I should have verified by a better test.
Yeah.
So yes, in the process of doing that currently, while we wait to hear about her therapy, her massage therapy with that too. So it's that's sort of standing in there. That feels an anticlimactic note to end on.
Yeah, it's so annoying, like with the testing and the, you know, the medical profession. I'm not a big fan. I'm trying to warm up to them, but doing this event as well hasn't helped. Yeah, I've never been a big fan of medical professions, but now I'm like even less so. And going through losses myself, and just you know, go home and just do it. Okay, thanks for that. Traumatic experience at home. Yeah, no, it's bad. It's bad. They need to work on that. Yeah. Any just before we wrap up, is there anything that you would want to say to dads, men trying to go through this, who are, you know, in the throes of loss, or on the same journey as you right now? Because obviously you guys are still on that journey. You're still trying to get this to happen. Is there anything that you'd want to say to anyone?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we have this sort of romanticized idea of being like, at least a lot of men do, and I never think of myself as someone who has like a machismo kind of, you know, protector of the household kind of vibe. At least not in my not in a sense of like any kind of like it defining my masculinity way. But the first thing that happened the minute that happened to my wife was that I completely disregarded myself and went 100% into making sure she was okay. Of course, that's part of being a partner, right? Is looking at you, of course. But you also have to, in the moments that you can, you need to face your own grief. And you need to face it honestly. If you feel it and if it is wrecking you, you need to address that. Otherwise, it's going to come crashing down and it's not going to let you help your partner in any meaningful way, I don't think. I think it's really important that if you feel that loss, that you address it. And if you feel it deeply, there are other men who do. And a lot of us want to talk. A lot of us wish there was a resource. A lot of us feel like we're going through everything our wives are going through, minus the physical and associated psychological, hormonal symptoms of a lost pregnancy. And I know not everyone does, and just like, you know, not an entire gender deals with anything, you know, as being painted in one color. Not all men deal with it the same way, not all women deal with it the same way, or anything for that matter. But, you know, it's not a moment to put on any kind of front. If it feels that way to you, if it's deep in yourself and you need to talk. Find someone who's been through it. Talk to somebody. If you can't talk to your spouse when that's happening, go find a professional to talk to, because you've got to face it. If it hits you that way. Again, not everybody feels that way. You know, you alluded to the fact that your husband had a different experience in some ways, and you know, that's just, people are different, and you know, of course that's as valid as anything else. But you've got to, you can't just protect and look out for. You've got to take care of yourself too. You have to treat yourself with the same care and respect. And the second thing is, you know, be mindful, and this isn't just for men, but be mindful. Be mindful when someone tells you that they've been through it. You know, remember what it was like for you. Even if you had a different experience than maybe seemingly what they went through, but remember what it was like for you, and give them enough. You know, give them enough. Let them know that they're valid. What they're feeling is valid and real, and you understand that, and that it's as tragic as a new life is joyous.
I think they were amazing points. Thank you for those, because I think, yeah, both of them are very, very important, I think, for men to hear. And just on a note of that first point, you know, if you can talk to your spouse, a lot of the time what can help her is just hearing you, is just hearing what's going on in your head, and knowing that she's not on her own, and she, you're feeling it too. Because I've spoken to a lot of women where the man did get into that mode of, I'm looking after my wife, I'm taking care of her, and yes, definitely we need that, obviously, but we need that other side too. So if you're feeling it and you're not telling her, maybe tell her, tell your partner, because she, maybe that's what she needs to hear, and maybe she wants to know. I've heard a few women where they're like, oh, I just wanted him to feel it, why didn't he feel it? And I'm like and then she said later he told her, and she was just like, you kept that in, like, I just wanted you to tell me. So yeah, if you're feeling it.
Yeah, I think there came a point where Amanda actually said to me at one point, I think when she had got kind of to where there were no more tears in that moment, she had a moment, she just looked at me and was like, are you okay? How are you? And the first time I was just like, I couldn't get out of my head. Like I had made the switch over and I was like, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. I just need to make sure you're okay. That's not great. If I could go back in time, I would have just like kind of, and of course, hindsight 2020, and in the moment, you're, like I said, adrenaline, cortisol, you're up here.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, 100% agree. 100% agree. The more you can do it together, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but the more you can do this together, the better it is. The better together thing.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't necessarily have to feel it in order to be there for your wife. And if you do feel it, then you can be there for her even more so, because you feel it and you understand it in a sense. But yeah, I think just remembering that, and that whole thing with you said your friend was talking about the split, like the not being together because, like in the loss, and how hard it was as a couple. I think a lot of the time that comes when there is that different feeling, those different emotions, or the man or the woman aren't talking about it. So I think communication is really key, especially when you're going through loss in any capacity. But thank you so much for joining me and talking, and sharing your experience and everything that you guys have been through. I will be praying. I pray for a lot of people.
I was gonna say, I'm sure that list is getting significantly longer as you do this.
It is. It's so long. I think I'm actually going to have to write a list. I said this at my last interview, but I think I actually have to, because it's getting ridiculously long now. The other night I was just like, please help everyone I've spoken to have babies, because I just can't remember everything. I was like, that's not good. That's not a good prayer. No. God knows what I mean.
Yeah, it's the abridged. We got places to be.
Yeah, the short version.
That's it.
But yeah, like, and the massage thing your wife told me about, and yeah, you need approval to get a massage apparently. So I just find that so interesting.
Well, I mean, we can go get it. It's whether or not our health insurance thinks that it's a worthy therapy to cover.
Yes. Is it worthy? I mean, it's massage, so yeah. No, she was saying that to me. It's hilarious.
I'm sure she gave you the full 9 on it.
Yeah. She was like, it's not really considered a proper thing, and I'm just like, well, it's okay.
Whatever. Listen, Ella, I have to say too, as we're wrapping up here, I think what you're doing is incredible. I really do. When my wife told me about it, and I started kind of digging in and watching your stuff and seeing what you were posting. It is all of the reasons that I felt drawn to maybe pursue that when I can give my all to it. I think this is beautiful. It is a gift. It's truly a gift that you are going to give to people that is going to be meaningful, like deeply and truly meaningful, because they're conversations that are hard to have. they're not always conversations that can come up for people often, or that people, they know that someone can listen and have an open mind, or any of those things. But just the opportunity to talk to a lot of people and have all of these experiences is just, it's a beautiful, beautiful gift. And I think it's incredible that you've set out to do this.
Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, if you do the podcast, and I hope you do, I'll link it below. And I'll just from my experience, I will say this: it is hard to have the conversations. It's very emotionally like hard, but it's really, really healing, like ridiculously healing. Just talking to so many different people and having that, it's really healing. And I'll give you a little bit of a uplifty thing at the end. If this uplifts you, I hope it does. Everyone I've talked to who's on the other side, like who they've finished their fertility treatments, they've finished doing what they're doing, regardless of the outcome, like having a child or not, or having an adopted child or surrogacy or anything like that, there is a contentment. There is a contentment and an ease and a peace there, because they know that they did everything. And they said that to me, you know, I just wanted to make sure I did everything I possibly could. And you guys definitely are. I can be sure of that. I mean, massage, that's sort of just massaging the uterus. That's just a really random thing. So, you know, you guys are definitely trying everything. So yeah, there is a contentment.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you. This has been just so lovely.
Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll get more men on, and we can have a whole load of you and talking and sharing. And we'll be doing we'll have like a little chat as well. Like we'll have an area where men can actually talk and talk openly. So hopefully we'll have that going as well. But thank you so much for being part of this and coming on and talking to me.
Beautiful. Thank you. Awesome.
Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye. Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.